In this webinar, we're going to talk about audits. We're going to talk about license audits and SaaS audits and how vendors, no matter how big or small they are, approach their customers to generate revenue and lock you in to their products for the long term. I also want to talk a little bit about what you can do instead of playing audit defense is to go on the offense and play the game to tilt the odds in your favor. So my name is Guarente. I'm the founder of Palisade Compliance, and I've spent 30 years in the audit industry. First 15 years with Oracle, prosecuting audits, and the last 15 years with Palisade Compliance, helping companies defend themselves and go on offense with audits.
Most people think an audit is an official letter showing up in the inbox. You have told me that is only a small part of it. What does an audit actually look like today?
When we think about license audits, the image I want you to have is an iceberg. What you can see above the ocean is that audit letter, is when they send it to you and you start that official process. But there's so much more going on under the surface. License verifications, friendly check-ins, letters from legal that may go around your software asset management program, contractual provisions requiring that you give information to a vendor. So the way I look at audits is broader than the tip of that iceberg. I want to look at the whole thing. I want to see all the danger that's in front of me. And, I hate to say it, but any information you give to a vendor in terms of your usage of a product is something that they can use against you in a compliance review. So license reviews, compliance reviews, all of those things I would consider if I was a customer dealing with these vendors. Anytime I saw one of those, I would ring the bell and sound the alarms and get my audit defense team, even though it's not an official audit.
Why do vendors audit in the first place?
The best answer I can give to that is because it works. That's why they audit. If it didn't work, they wouldn't audit. And what do I mean by it works? Well, it generates more revenue. It starts conversations. Maybe you're not returning their phone calls and they want to have a conversation. It locks you into future versions and products and ties you to their ecosystem. So the best answer I can give is it just works. It's very effective. You would be amazed if you saw the ROI of these technology companies and their audit departments. They are ridiculous in terms of their profitability. So they will stop auditing when it stops working.
Do you have a story of a client who responded too fast, too openly? What did they send? What did it cost them? And what did you see from your side of the table?
I'll go one better than that. I've got examples of customers who volunteered for audits. So it's not even that the vendor reached out to them and handed them an official letter and said, give us all this information, and they just did it. There are companies out there who actively go to the vendor and say, I'm going to give you some information, and then you tell me if I'm in compliance. So that is what we call an unforced error. You never, ever want to do that. You never want to give a vendor information unless you know the answer already. So verify that I'm in compliance because I've already done the work. That's okay in certain circumstances. But the fastest problem I've seen is the unforced error, when companies actually reach out to vendors and just hand them information and say, please come audit me. Mistake number one, that never ends well.
Once the official audit starts, vendors run a set of tactics almost every time. You spent years inside one of these vendors. What are the moves you saw run over and over?
Like you said, this goes across vendors. So one of the tactics is speed, rush, before you're ready to figure out a long-term plan. For example, your contracts with your vendors say you have 45 days to respond to an audit letter. You get the audit letter and they say, we want to meet tomorrow. I'm not exaggerating that either. It's like, let's meet tomorrow. So what they've done is they've taken what you should have is 45 days to prepare for an audit. They've taken away the possibility to do that. And the problem is when you say, yes, okay, let's meet tomorrow. And now you've just lost 45 days of preparation. That's an easy example. Another example is the the perceived difference that vendors put between their audit team and their sales team. So they'll send the sales team nominates customers in many cases for audits, sends in the audit team, and then the audit team goes and says, hey, we're not part of sales. We're totally independent. You can trust us. Those are two common tactics of how a vendor will basically rig the system, rig the whole process, and put you on the defensive from the very first email, very first phone call. You're already playing defense.
What about rooting around your defense? So we've talked a little bit about how vendors don't always call the right person. They call someone that is an easier target.
Vendors are very, very good about getting information from their customers. And you have to think about when you work with a large technology company, fill in the blank, any of these names, it's not one person at your company working with one person over there. They've got consultants on site, they've got developers, you're calling in for support, you've got sales engineers, you've got executives, you've got a dozen, 20, 30 people from the vendor who are talking to people in your company. That's just the reality of it. The other thing is, most contracts that you have with your vendors do not state a particular person or email address or someone to notify in case of an audit. So the vendor will often coordinate internally amongst all those people who are talking to you and figure out who's the weakest link. Who should I send this letter to? Or forget the letter, let me just ask them to run a report from a database or one of our systems and hand us that information. Totally innocuous request. Just hand us this information, but you don't know it's going to be used in a license review or an audit situation. So you have to think about it, I always try to think about it from the vendor's perspective. They're trying to do as many audits as possible for the least amount of cost. So they are going to find the path of least resistance in your organization, regardless of what defenses you put up. Hey, this is my audit defense person. That's great, but that doesn't mean they're going to go right to that person.
When you look back at the audits that went badly, the ones where the vendor got far more than they should have, what were the common mistakes made?
One of the most common mistakes is relying on the accuracy of the vendor. So the vendor's job is to throw the biggest number at you and have you negotiate down from there. And one of the things I see constantly when clients come to us in a late stage audit defense, they've gone through the whole process and now they've got the big bill from the vendor, is we look at that report, and it's often called the final report from the vendor, and it's filled with mistakes. It's filled with inaccuracies. It's filled with assumptions that we just don't accept. So I think that is one of the fundamental challenges that companies have when they're being audited, is that the information coming back is just not accurate. There's no one at the vendor in their audit teams who gets compensated for the accuracy of their audits. They only get compensated, if they do, on the revenue that they're generating from those audits. So there's no incentive to do it right. The incentive is to do it quickly. So that's one of the biggest things we see, is just the vendor makes mistakes and the customers don't call them out on it and challenge them on that.
Great. What about letting the vendor define your number?
The whole process of an audit, as vendors have written the playbook, is that they will take information you give them, they will put it in a black box somewhere, they'll put some rules on top of that you may or may not be aware of, and then they'll give you a number. So they'll go and tell you, and then you have to defend yourself. So they found 10 different things, and you try to explain away 3 or 4 of them, and then you're left with a big number. So rather than going down that path and giving them all the data and letting them come up with an answer, one of our favorite approaches is to do the audit ourselves and to give the vendor the answer. No, we are in compliance. Here's the numbers. Here's our reports. And sometimes the clients have to pay a little bit of money, much less than the vendor was hoping for. But most of the times they don't. The customer is in compliance because they just applied what was in the contracts. So really getting ahead of that. And it's exactly what the vendor does. So we want to put a number in front of the vendor and have them challenge it. whereas the vendor wants to put a number in front of us and have us challenge it. So if you can get into that situation that I just described and you're telling the vendor, your audit risk just goes down exponentially, 90%. And then if the vendor has, some valid points, you can always adjust your numbers up a little bit, but traditionally they don't. So you just don't want to let someone make up an answer and then you're trying to defend it. There is literally no way to prove that you are in compliance. Right? There could be a server somewhere. There could be a piece of software. So the vendors, all they're trying to do is put some doubt in your mind. And you need to make them prove you're out of compliance versus you proving that you're in compliance. I think that's the fundamental difference in how we approach that.
A common thing is companies handle the first stretch themselves. They end up giving away most of their leverage, then call us for help. We can still help. We're just starting with one hand behind our back.
Yeah, making sure you start the audit off well on offense versus defense is critical. And it's interesting because we've had customers come to us at the very end. They've got the final report. They are panicking because they owe a vendor millions of dollars, allegedly, and then they come to us. We are still able to help them. We get that reduced significantly. But there's two challenges with that. Number one is it's really difficult. So instead of it taking a month, because we followed the process from the beginning, it takes 6 months because now you're trying to move the vendor off of a position that they believe that they have. And you've given up your ability to optimize your environment before, dealing with the vendor. So you lose a little bit of leverage and it's hard. It's difficult, right? You dug yourself a 12-foot hole and you're trying to climb out of it. And yes, you can absolutely climb out of it. It's just going to take more effort than if you started at ground level. So there's always that opportunity, but like we said, the vendors design the audits to be easy in the beginning. So it's easy for you to give them information. It's easy for you to make mistakes. It's easier for you to say things that can be taken out of context. That is all by design. That's a feature of their audits, not a bug. So if you can get ahead of that, you can avoid all those mistakes and you can take advantage of the opportunity, that the notification periods, making sure all the rules are laid out in front of you. All the opportunities are there if you start earlier. You can always get help, but vendors design their audits to get maximum leverage in that first 30 to 60 days. So that's really, in a perfect world, that's when you would get help.
You live in the 90-day audit trap with clients. Walk us through what taking control actually looks like in the first 60 days. What are the moves?
Well, I'll tell you one of the things that you cannot do that will hurt you is ignoring, right? So if you just ignore it, I'm going to take control, I'm going to figure this out on my own, and I'm not going to communicate with the vendor. That is not a recommended approach because that's when the vendor does crazy things like breach letters and legal escalations and things the temperature goes up way too high unnecessarily. So you want to respond. First thing is send that response. You get the audit notification, send a firm, clear response to the vendor. Don't say, well, we'll figure this out. We don't know who the right person is. Maybe next week we can see. None of that. Be very clear and concise and read your contracts. So what does your contract with the vendor? We don't care about the vendor's policies. We don't care about their process. All we care about is the contracts we have with the vendor. So read that contract and respond accordingly. Dear vendor, thank you for this note. We look forward to showing you we are in compliance. Per our contract, we have 45 days to respond. So let's connect on, pick a date, 45 days out from there. So that is the first thing you can do to respond to a vendor. Once you do that, they are on notice. Like, these people know what they're doing. This will not be a cakewalk. Maybe they'll back off a little bit and not pursue with the same vigor because they thought you were going to be an easy target. But you want to set the tone from the beginning that you are running the schedule here and not the vendor. The other thing I would do is I would use whatever time that is to figure out where you are. Are you in compliance? Are you out of compliance? Is it a gray area? Like, you want to have the answer. In a perfect world, you would know your compliance position before you have the first meeting with the vendor. because then everything else flows from there, right? If you're still trying to figure things out and it's unknown and there's, a lot of worry and fear and risk, and, that's when things get heated. That's when things drag out. But use that window, whatever window you have, to figure out your compliance position. So those are the things I would do. Read those contracts, respond accordingly, and use your window to figure out your own compliance position.
I might just take that verbatim, but what about centralizing all vendor communication through one person? Is that important, or is that something that is relatively standard?
Yeah, and again, this is a challenging one. So how do we communicate? Once a vendor issues an audit notice to us, how do we communicate with that vendor? On the one hand, you have to keep working with them. Like, your business relies on their technology, on their software. We can't say we're never talking to any vendor until this is resolved. But you can put pressure on their sales teams. Remember, the sales teams are the ones who sent in the audit police. So you can stop any momentum with new sales activity. So that's definitely a thing we recommend. So let's pause everything, because we want this sales team that's auditing you to get pressure from this other sales team that might not be auditing you, and let them fight internally. You definitely want to do that. You want to make sure there's knowledge within your company. At the very least, all those people who are interacting with the vendor, you want them to know you're being audited. I don't care if it's a DBA, systems administrator, someone in finance. ABC company just sent us an audit letter, and have some guidelines. When you're talking to them, if they're asking about these types of things, please refer that to me. If they want to get an invoice paid, okay, that's different. But if they want to ask you about your usage, then that's something that needs to be referred to someone else. And you want that communication both up and down the organization. So one thing that we see is the compliance teams will forget to tell their bosses because they want to fix the problem themselves. We don't want to worry the executives because we've got this under control. And then the executives are surprised 4 months later when the audit's not progressing and they get a call or they get a letter from the vendor's legal department. So you want to make sure you're communicating internally and opening up that conversation, and let your boss know on day 1 that you got the audit letter, not on day 90.
Is there anything a company can actually do to lower the chance of getting audited in the first place? Or is it just a matter of when at this point?
So there are 3 things that you can do to lower your audit risk, and 2 of them are just not something people want to do. The first is just keep giving the vendor lots of money. Keep feeding the machine, and as long as the vendor doesn't get hungry, then they're not gonna come after you. So just keep giving them lots of money. Companies do that. There are very large organizations who are very profitable who say, I'm not going to worry about compliance because I'm just going to keep giving them lots of money. But eventually that runs out. Someone says, why are we giving this vendor so much? Number 2 is stop using the vendor's products. So if you don't agree with the way a vendor approaches their clients, then just move off of their product. Easier said than done, especially with these large mega vendors. So then the third option is make sure you're in compliance. Again, vendors audit because it works. Make sure you are in compliance. Even if you are audited, if you are in compliance, if there are no problems, the audit will go smoothly as long as you run it properly. There's nothing you can do to eliminate your risk. If you're using software from a particular vendor and they have a right to audit you, you could get audited, even if you are in compliance. So most companies get 2 to 3 official audit letters a year from various. You're dealing with 100, 200 different on-prem and SaaS vendors. You just need 1 or 2% of them to audit you, and that's 1 or 2 audits a year, right there. So it's going to happen. It is by design, and sometimes those vendors are just probing to find money. But the number one thing, and where we help clients, is just make sure you're in compliance. Know your position, and that will help you determine a strategy to reduce your risk.
Great. I'm going to give you 2 situations here, Craig, and give me your take on this. So scenario number 1, company gets audited. They go on audit offense. They show the vendor right away, this is not going to be easy. They end up winning that audit, owing nothing. Is the likelihood of another vendor coming to them, does that lower their chance of being audited again? And then scenario 2, if a company doesn't handle an audit well, they panic, they send too much information. Does that put a bullseye on their back for other vendors to also audit them or get audited again?
The company that runs an audit well and comes out without any findings, so they come out with a clean audit, they should, I recommend, if they're worried about other vendors auditing them, that they let those vendors know that they have a robust software asset management program and we've gone through audits and we are clean. That could help reduce some risk. Now, on the other side, if you do not run your audits properly and you get found out of compliance, and we see this all the time. So some of these big vendors, they use third parties to conduct audits. Big mega vendor uses this third party. Well, guess what? That third party is conducting audits for multiple technology vendors. So if they were hired by company A and they found a big problem, well, what are they going to do? They're going to go to company B and say, you know what? These guys were just out of compliance over there. You should audit them and we'll help you. So I think especially in those cases where vendors have used third parties to do the audits, your risk goes way up because those third parties are looking for more business. You're looking for more revenue. Most audits are covered by NDAs and they don't go public. You don't read the news and say, so-and-so is audited. I'll give you an exception to that is public sector. In public sector, definitely vendors can say, hey, this city, this town, this state, this federal agency was audited and they were found millions of dollars out of compliance. In those situations, those things go public, and definitely other vendors will pick up on that. And, hey, they were found out of compliance and they're using our stuff, so let me go audit them. So in those scenarios, I think it definitely does increase your risk of the next vendor. If you don't handle one right, the next one's going to find out.
We've talked about a few things that pop up during a client's growth cycle that sends signals to a vendor that maybe this is the time to audit them. Those things being acquisitions, major growth, big technology changes, expired ULA, a recent cloud migration. When those things happen, can you expect an audit soon?
There are definitely company level events that will increase your likelihood of audits. And it doesn't matter if you're growing or you're shrinking. So I try to put myself in the vendor's shoes just because it helps me advise the client. Having been in the vendor's shoes, it helps me advise the client on what the vendor is about to do to them. So let's talk about companies that are growing. It's not about the list price of my product. They price their products based on value. So if my company's making $1 billion and I buy from this vendor and now we're making $2 billion, the vendor's already got the idea that they're getting twice as much value out of our product. So we need to get twice as much money out of them. So it's just, you're growing. Now, what if you're shrinking? That is a common target. Like, let's get some money before the ship sinks, right? These guys are going out of business. And we've seen this way too often where they get the audit letter when they're in a time of distress. We're going to spend less with that vendor, so they're going to audit us. So you're growing, you have an audit risk. You're shrinking, you have an audit risk. M&A activity is a classic. I think pretty much all vendors use that. If I have a contract, if I'm a vendor and I have a contract with company A and they merge with company B, I know what the contracts are for company B. I know what the contracts are for company A. You've told me what you're doing. Now I can plan accordingly. So there's things that you can't avoid exposing to the vendor. Your performance, for publicly traded companies, mergers and acquisitions, things like that definitely do increase the likelihood of you getting an audit letter.
Walk us through what working with Palisade actually looks like at each stage. Someone who has not gotten a letter yet, someone who just got one, and someone already deep in the audit.
Yeah, so those buckets are before, during, and after. So before an audit, so if you started working with us before the audit letter came, we would start digging. We would, do what the vendor does and start trying to get information that we can use, in this case, to help you uncover the truth. We want to find the ultimate truth. From the ultimate truth, you can make the best decision for your organization. So we have risk analysis profile tools that we use. Tell us about the vendors that you're using. We know which ones are more likely or less likely to audit you. That's our fire risk, right? Those are the conditions. We want to spot the conditions where a fire could start. And that's where we start our work with those clients, like digging in there. Sometimes, all the conditions are right for an audit, but we get in there and now they're fine here. And then we can go, what are the less risky vendors, and then work from there. So there's all this pre-work that we can do. It's especially effective for companies who have mature software asset management programs. They are down this path. They've got people who are dedicated to doing this, and we can help them do their jobs better, right? So they've got tools. We can analyze the information. We've got the market intelligence to help them. And that will help them avoid audits. It'll help them in their true-ups. It'll help them reduce their risks, and it'll also help them reduce the cost of renewals and extensions that they have to do with vendors. So there's so much benefit to getting in there before. Now, if you're already a Palisade customer, we start audit defense or audit offense on day one. You got the letter. The first thing you do is you call us. You don't call the vendor and respond back to them. And we work through a plan on how to respond. Now, if you're not a client of us, you're probably going to go 30, 60 days, and then you're going to figure out you need some help. And that's the later stage audits. And then we have to figure out, again, where you are in that process. What did you say? What did you not say? Again, what is the ultimate truth? And then go from there. There's also the after, like what happens after. And that's, I wish more customers called us before the audits come. Right? But typically there's a fire, there's an audit, they call us, and then they say, don't go away. We want to make sure this never happens again. And it's a big circle. So we start, again, with our audit risk assessment. Okay, we know what the risk was there and we fixed it. Well, what about the other vendors? What do your contracts say? What are the vendors doing? How are you using their technology? And we want to stay in the loop with those clients over the long term so that we can find the smoke, put out those fires before they really spark and cause problems, and deal with any emergencies or issues that come up, and keep the client in compliance, because ultimately that will help them spend the least amount of money with those vendors and get the most value from those vendors' products.
We've touched on this analogy a few times, and it's about how Tiger Woods, although he was the best golfer in the world, he had a cat. How do you kind of explain that analogy with how you work with your clients?
I use the golf analogy way too much in work and life, but there's a couple of ways we use that. So yes, think of any major athlete. Tiger Woods is a great example. Had 6 golf coaches. Had a swing coach, had a putting coach, had a long game coach, had a fitness coach, had a mental health coach. All of those things, and all these athletes have these things. So they've got teams around them that they can use to help them perform better. And that's the analogy we use. We're not going in there to replace anyone's role and to sort of get anyone fired. We're going in there to make organizations better, whether that's the legal team and supporting them with industry insight and policy and practices from specific vendors, or it's the software asset management program, helping them analyze data and come up with results, or procurement, helping them negotiate better deals. What's the art of the possible? So that's how we approach it. The other analogy I'll use is we've played this game 1,000 times. So, I can go to a golf course. I'm a member of a golf course, and I could look at the first hole, and I know where the traps are. There's a part of that course you cannot see from the tee box. There's traps over the horizon, and you might think you hit a perfect shot and it's going right in the water because you just can't see the water. But we've played that game so many times. we know the course. So we know where the traps are. We know where the best positions are to be so that your next shot is the easiest to help you score the best, the lowest, in this case, the lowest audit findings versus the lowest golf score. But that's how we approach it. Like, we want to be amazing coaches and champions for our customers so that they can succeed.
If you could take one thing from this, take this. The audit process is not designed to be fair. It's designed to generate revenue for the vendor. Once you know that, it changes how you respond to all of it.
The one thing I would take from this talk is that the audit process is designed by the vendors to generate the ultimate leverage for the vendor. Most people think audits are designed to find the ultimate truth. That is not the case here. It is to create ultimate leverage, which will generate ultimate revenue for the vendor. And what we highly recommend is that you come up with the ultimate truth, which will help you make the best decisions. So if you can reframe what an audit is, don't think of it as a tax audit. Understand it's for leverage. And if you understand that, everything else falls into place after that in terms of your reaction and what you trust and don't trust and the information you give them and how you deal with that. So audits are designed for ultimate leverage and not ultimate truth.
If someone is sitting in front of a letter right now, or they just want to get ready before one shows up, where can they reach out? Where can they get a hold of you? Where can they find more information? Why should they choose you?
If you are in a situation where you're dealing with an active audit, or you're worried about an audit, or just want to avoid an audit and you want some help from us, you can go to palisadecompliance.com and learn all about our organization. You can email us at info@palisadecompliance.com. We are a global organization. We support companies all around the world, from Fortune 10 companies to tiny mom and pop shops who just happen to have big audit problems. So I would start with our website and reach out to us, and we will respond right away because you need help today.